62 years old. This woman, about 63. There's a parallel. When I was in graduate school, she was forced into the countryside under the regime of Mao Zedong. He had the idea with the intellectuals in China and what was beginning to be a burgeoning middle class were getting too soft. They weren't in touch with the people. He had a massive re-education program. Some people didn't survive, some were killed, where doctors and lawyers and teachers and what he called the emerging bourgeois was sent to the countryside. She was one of those people. I see the rebellion in her painting. While I do see the theme of the struggling Chinese worker, she's rebelling with a very Western abstract style. And then she goes back another generation to the generations of her grandmother and her great-grandmother and gives you a traditional symbol that's in a lot of Chinese paintings. There are a lot of contradictions in that painting, and I think that's what she talks about. Because today, China, once in my lifetime, a communist country now has a mixed economy. One of the largest burgeoning economies in the world. And how have they done that? They've done it by shifting the way their economy is shaped, and also they put a re-emphasis on education. One of the things I learned as a person born in 1949, when America was going through some very significant social changes, that it would be important, it would almost be imperative for one that looked like me to be educated. We still live in a society where mobility is possible for some of us. I still make the statement, however, that some people are more equal than others. I don't make the statement that education is the great equalizer, but it does emancipate people, sometimes from some very diabolical situations. While I come historically from a group of peasant workers who migrated to Chattanooga, I was surrounded by educators. So I had an aunt that was a school, I had two aunts that were school teachers. One was a nurse, a mother who was a librarian, a father that was a principal. I was surrounded by books because they knew that education was important. Because they could stretch back only one generation and remember when public education wasn't free. They could go back 3 generations and remember when it was illegal for people that looked like me to read and write. The poor folk may not get any education at all. The middle class will struggle to get an education. The elites have education as part of an entitlement. It generates a system, as we've talked about, of social inequality. There is a direct correlation between one's ascribed characteristics and one's achieved characteristics once you factor in education. Let me explain that. When we talk about mobility in American life, we have to look at a person's characteristics, their social characteristics, to determine their social location. Those ascribed characteristics are directly related to what we call the achieved characteristics. What are achieved? Those things that can be attained by personal effort: education, income, and occupation. So once we run it through the sieve and look at ourselves, especially in a society that historically has practiced a system of color pigmentocracy, we know automatically that phenotype means something, that the color of your skin definitely means something, that your social class background also means something. And therefore, your educational attainment sometimes is determined by your social class. It is, in a sense, a luck of the draw. For example, there is a system of social stratification that existed in China and that existed in the United States called the caste system. It was a system of closed social mobility. One experienced life directly in the class that they were born in. There was no upward mobility, sometimes some horizontal mobility. The best case of that would be, in fact, classic India that instituted a caste system. Another example of that would be the United States that had a system of color caste stratification. And therefore, education was meted out on what one brought into the world. Now, we know education in America did not become mass and public education until 1900. So who went to school and why did they go to school? But let's go back another 30 years. At the end of the slaveholders' rebellion, what you call the Civil War, the Freedmen's Aid Bureau came into the South and set up a system of free and public education. What people don't realize, it also spoke to sometimes the needs of the white poor and white working class. The Freedmen's Aid Bureau, as a matter of fact, left money in Chattanooga. I find UTC to be a walking contradiction. Some of the money that was put aside by the Freedmen's Aid Bureau at your school, which was called Grant University, was supposed to educate former enslaved African Americans. It did not happen. Education was seen then as a tool, the access to education to keep the class system, the social system the way it was. Public education was seen as necessary for all groups, including the immigrant groups. So in the 20th century, it is the story of the rise of public education. All ethnic groups that have come to American shores have seen education, have used education as a way to move in and move up in the social system. However, some people are more equal than others. When I first saw the painting, I didn't think of slaves as I thought of third world people, dark-skinned people, struggling people, tired people, and then I realized in a global sense that in a global sense, under industrial and what we call hyper-capitalism, dark skins usually do the dirty and marginal work. I.e., 4 years ago, there was a riot in Paris, France, and all the brown-skinned kids were rebelling. Well, it turns out that the brown-skinned kids in France were the ones who were getting poor educations, who had no jobs, who were unemployed. It's a global kind of issue when you look at it in a broad sense. When I finished high school, I only had classmates that looked like me. The city of Chattanooga, Hamilton County, has the longest documented running case in the American court system. The case was called Mapp versus the Board of Education. There was major resistance in this valley to the desegregation of the public school. But the dialogue even gets more interesting when you look at the players and participants. Chattanooga also has a very rich history of extremely well-funded, well-maintained, well-run, and excellent private schools. So people that tended to support and be a part of the private school system sometimes were not part of the dialogue about the terrain of the public school. They were interested about the education of their own children. Later, as it turns out, some of those same people, however, saw that that would be good for Chattanooga to desegregated schools. How did we survive under a colored caste system and still maintain to get out of here? I always use the analogy of the Exodus babies. They wrapped us up and they hid us away. And they didn't let us see the bad things. Except my father was a different kind of man. They put a bomb in Howard School out on Market Street, and they blew Howard School up in the late 50s. My father taught driving. That Saturday morning, the call came to the house. My father was kind of like the consigliere of Chattanooga. He could be in the preacher's pulpit or the pimp's back room or the mayor or cookie turkey. He was all over town. Okay, they said, "Carl, you can come and see this." Mother was crying. "Don't take that child out there. He doesn't need to see that, Carl." It was around the time when the 4 little girls that got killed in the Birmingham school, so the town was tense. If you remember, lived in Chattanooga, there was also around that same period when they bombed the Jewish synagogue. So people were on edge. Daddy makes me get in the car. Talking about education. Telling you a story. Get in the car, Clark. We get in Dad's old Chevrolet and we ride out to Howard School. My father took my hand. I'll never forget this. He walked me to the classrooms and gymnasiums that had been bombed. He walks very slow up the side and he places me there. And he puts his hand in and he says, "I want you to stand, I want you to look at this." That's a lot for a kid. And I'm smelling the cordite of dynamite. And I'm seeing school books. And I'm seeing chairs that are all ripped up. And I'm saying, my God, suppose some of my friends are, suppose I just happen to come through. What are these people trying to do to us? Education brings us together. Education makes us realize that we're all human. Education should make us realize that there is no DNA marker for race. We happen to follow a social system that's created false artificial categories, which has meted out opportunities to some and kept opportunities back from others because of the way they look. That's what this this picture, to me, was about. It was about struggle, it was about social inequality, and it was about the reproduction of the school system. I can educate a child without schooling a child. Schooling only makes you obedient. Early American education was to prepare workers to be obedient on the factory assembly line. You can acquire knowledge in several ways. But I think that the way we have structured this present society, these institutions will not disappear. They should not disappear. They should be supported. We should have an open dialogue about the issue, education, and the reproduction of the classroom.